Good morning. My name is Richard Wexler, and I want to invite you to episode 18 of our podcast entitled Caring in America. So, as I do with each episode, a little recap: who am I, why am I doing this, and so forth. So, folks that have been listening to our episodes, I was minding my own business in the software industry about 18 years ago, married later, two small kids, 11 and 7. My wife has a business out of the home. And then all of a sudden in the summer of '05, we started getting phone calls that turned into 4 calls from all of our parents who were in their 80s. And we started an unbelievable journey of taking care of them for the next 14 years. This led to our company, Points of Life, the ability to educate people about this tiny little word called care around the country. And then I got this crazy idea: how could I reach out to more people? And decided to put this podcast together. And we are sharing both experts in the industry. We're also sharing a lot of stories. We have someone I'm about to introduce in a second that would probably fit both of those roles. So our guest today is Shawn Barnes. He is a franchise owner of a placement company through Care Patrol. He's been doing this for a couple of years now, actually 13. Are you there, Shawn?
Yes, I am, Richard. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you and with your audience.
You're very welcome. And as I've given you kind of a hard time about, I get that accent. Where do you live and work out of? What city and what state?
I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, but I service the majority of North Alabama, from Montgomery to Tennessee, from Georgia to Mississippi.
So as we said, you've been doing this about 13 years. You have a personal story you want to talk about. You also have some other stories that you've taken from clients you've worked with. I'd like to begin with that personal story. And you sent me some notes on this, and I kind of went, wow, when I started reading this. And the first story we're going to talk about starts with a tornado. Go ahead.
Well, it does. It does. We live in Alabama, so tornadoes are ubiquitous, but I've only been in a couple. And one was on, I believe it was April 9th of 2011. An F2 touched down in our backyard in the creek behind our yard, and 18 trees were felled. We cut our way out, and why that may be important to this discussion is I was in the midst of trying to purchase the Care Patrol franchise, and so I was well on my way to doing so. And then for 10 days we were living in a hotel, and so it quickly then led to the next sort of barrier to the purchase of this franchise, which was shortly after we got back in our home. I got a call from my folks. My stepdad was at a senior golf tournament and threw his back out. So I went to get them, and he continued to sort of decline to the point where he couldn't get out of bed. So we went to the hospital. My mother let me know. My wife, who is an internet doctor, correctly diagnosed him after about 30 days in the hospital with multiple myeloma. Why that's important is it was a sort of trial by fire for me in learning what my future clients would be going through, which is, alternating, times in the hospital with your loved one, having folks come in the room and not really knowing what's going on or what's about to happen next, and not feeling like you get any real information that's actionable, that you know what to do next other than, pray. And so I went through that, went through the rehab process with him after, went through the process of trying to convince my folks to move to a senior community to no avail. At which point I learned another lesson about this business, which is generally our adult parents feel that we, as adult children, are perpetually 12 years old. And so whatever we might tell them is not really taken into as much serious consideration.
I'm
And so,
laughing, Shawn. I'm laughing because I've heard that, I've experienced that, and I've heard that. Go ahead.
yeah, so I tell my clients now, as odd as it may seem, it may be better for there to be a third party to have the same discussion and say the same things to your parents that you've been saying for these weeks or months or years. And they may listen because we're so called experts, whereas you are a de facto 12-year-old child. That's been another beneficial lesson with it. And it's interesting, I mean, those are tragedies, clearly. But I feel blessed to have been through those because it taught me how to better have empathy, I guess, or sympathy or understanding of the positions that folks are in. When we get on a healthcare journey in America, there are very few people there to guide us, to advocate for us, to tell us what questions to ask or what buzzwords to use. And so my stepdad's unfortunate illness and subsequent death was a huge learning curve for me. And I'd say that is a truism among most people in the placement services industry at Care Patrol and, those who are freestanding or those who are members of other companies. I'd say the majority of us have had an experience, a personal experience that leads us to feel that this is not simply work to do, but a mission, a passion, a ministry for some. And that's certainly what it's become for me. So while those were tragic events and tornadoes are certainly nothing to brush aside, nor is multiple myeloma, it was a grateful lesson for me.
Wow. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I agree with all the people I've talked to in the elder care industry over these 18 years. A lot of them have come from personal experience, as you have, as I have, and it's a really tough way to learn, but it does teach you an awful lot. I know you mentioned another story about a 69-year-old woman. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, actually, two. I had most recently was asked by the families of two women, both of whom were 69 years old, both of whom were active. One was, active in the home and crafts and arts and those sorts of things, planting. The other was an active tennis player, and still got out weekly to play tennis. And yet, each of them have early onset Alzheimer's, and they are elopement risk. So, meaning that they are possibly could wander out of their home and get lost or worse. And so, each of the families came to me, and the issue we're having now is really sort of twofold with younger and younger folks getting dementia. One is this generation, the boomer generation, doesn't have the expendable cash that the prior generations, the silent generation, and before them, the greatest generation, who are now, up in their upper 80s and 90s, that there are billions of dollars transferred between those generations, but the boomers don't have it. And you're looking at with early onset Alzheimer's. I mean, someone could live a number 15 years, 20 years sometimes. And where in America do we care for these people? How do we pay for this care? And then when you're looking for care for them, as these families were, you might be subject to listening to the advice of a friend who's been through it with their parent. However, their parent may be 82. That's the usual average age of our assisted living memory care admissions is 82. And so, if you're a 69-year-old person, even if you have dementia, you can see the difference in your age and the age of the 82-year-old. And so it's not just a matter of where is there good care, but also where is there good care where this person, this young person, active, can find a cohort, an age cohort, and someone with whom they can bond who's at their level. And that's the nuance of what placement is. It's not simply knowing that the place is safe or available or has good care. It's knowing or having interviewed your parent or yourself or whomever, knowing that they'll fit there, understanding the culture of the community, understanding the life of the community, the activity of it. That is where I've learned that I can have the most impact with families, whether they're, in this case, young with early onset or older. I think people are too often go by online reviews or, words from a friend or loved one. And the fact is that my mother and your mother are different, and they're different in their stages of dementia. They need different types of support. They need different types of environments, and they need to fit. They need to feel like they have a place, that it is their home, to the sense that they still have a sense of home.
Let me ask you a couple questions. I'm in complete agreement with you. And one thing I've noticed around the country, I'm not, and I'll see if you have as well, that as you talk about, a lot of folks that have been going off to assisted living over the last 20 years have been more in the age bracket of around 85. What I'm starting to see around the country is exactly what you're talking about, where the boomers, and I kind of laugh because I'm one of them, not 80 yet, but one of them, lived through the 60s. I'm not talking about myself, but used every drug under the sun, overweight, diabetes, this and that, and everything else. And I'm hearing and seeing a lot of people that are in their early 70s that need care now, where maybe their parents didn't need that till they were 85.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we also see that among the boomer generation, there was higher use of illicit drugs and alcohol, and those can be precursors to dementia. And we see that there are higher incidences of drug abuse and addiction among people in assisted living in that boomer generation. We have a real lack of health care in this country, and it's about to be exposed, because we have a 10,000 people daily since 2009 until 2029 turning 65, who, if they are on average, will be my clients in 17 years. If they turn 65 today when they're 82, we have all of these people and not enough caregivers. At one time, 20 years ago, there were 7 caregivers identified for every individual in the United States. 7 potential family members, loved ones, friends, what have you. Today, that number is 4.
Wow. 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 And we have 80 million baby boomers moving north, with the oldest turning 80 in about 3 years.
That's
I mean,
right.
from a professional standpoint, do you see communities really ready for what's coming?
Well, I mean, the communities individually, sure. I think they, are ready. It's the fact that there aren't enough, at least in Alabama. And I couldn't speak for other areas, but I would believe that that would simply be true because of the population growth everywhere. There aren't enough communities, and there aren't enough affordable communities. And Medicaid doesn't pay enough towards the benefit in those states where Medicaid is offered to make it worthwhile for the better communities to accept Medicaid. And so, that's an issue just across the board in post-acute care and in, long-term care, rather. Well, the average, it probably would be close to the Genworth study that I put the average around 3,400. I could tell you here in the Birmingham, Alabama area, you could find independent living for as little as $18.95 per month, and you could pay over $5,800. And independent living is simply an apartment with services, no help. Assisted living would start at $2,300, all inclusive, And then you really, on average, though, would be spending in the neighborhood of 4,600. So that 23 sort of lowers the average. And then if you were looking for memory care, the best we could do in this area is 3,750 per month on the low end, which is good care, up to 69, 7150. Now, the thing that I want to point out about that is that community that's 3750 is run by a nurse who's been there for the last dozen years. She eats, breathes, and sleeps what she does. She loves on all of her residents. They all receive good care. And yet, there are folks who believe, I think, that because they're the least expensive, surely they couldn't be good care. Surely the good care is more expensive. And, that's not necessarily true. This is a 70-year-old complex. Their mortgage is paid. It's a smaller building. It's Spartan. And, it's certainly not marble and chandeliers, but it's good care. And that's what you want. You want caregivers who've been there like she has, like hers have been. That's what you want specifically in memory care, where you want people to remember who came in the door, not who's sitting in the room now, because that will help them prompt and redirect and help that person live a more full and complete life. And so, the price doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is the care. And the most expensive places I generally don't recommend because they don't provide good care. They're beautiful, but they don't provide good care.
Interesting question for you along this topic of folks with cognitive issues that trying to figure out within the family, do we keep mom, dad at home? Do we move them to a community? I'm sure you've probably been involved in a lot of conversations like that. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, I think it's unique to every individual. So I don't know, again, I don't think I could say, well, this is good care and you should go there. You should go there and see it for yourself and know for yourself that it's the right thing, first of all. And so everyone's different. I'm in that very boat. My mother, who has Alzheimer's, I assume we've not had her to see a neurologist yet, is there's clearly a plateau that she's dropped to. Now, Alzheimer's is wonderful in a sense in that it's sort of a slow gradation of how it takes over, whereas something like frontotemporal would be sharp declines and then a plateau and then sharp declines and then a plateau. Alzheimer's is more even, but I can tell she's past a line, and so we're moving her in September the 22nd, and what I know and the reason that I moved her is she lives alone and she's lonely. And while loneliness can mimic dementia, it certainly also can add to it. And I think the fact that she's not engaged, that she's not with her age cohorts, that she's not discussing remembering when or having any conversations for that matter, I think it has led to a decline in her dementia. And I think if you are someone whose parent is living alone with dementia, this is something you need to consider. She will worsen or he will worsen living alone in his capacity. You will keep him or her longer with you if you consider community. And it's community that's most important here. Yes, they may need help with activities of daily living, but what they really need is someone to talk to feel vibrant and vital again, to feel autonomous, not be living with, Fox News or Let's Make a Deal, which is what my mother does. For us, that was the decision. For others, you may feel that it's a financial decision, and it certainly is. It's very expensive. But in general, in terms of other folks, I used to work in the hospice space, and one of the things about hospice and morphine or methadone or any sort of pain medication, they advocate that you start low and you go slow. And so I would say for people whose parents maybe have early or mild cognitive impairment, you might begin to look at things like adult daycares. These, at least in the South, are often run by religious organizations It's about $65 a day. You drop them, or they sometimes will pick them up around 6 or 7. You pick them up around 5 or 6 at night. And they get lunch and breakfast and activities throughout the day. And most of the people there have some sort of mild to moderate cognitive impairment. And the people who work there are used to redirecting and caring for those with dementia. And I think that may help you get, if you're a wife caring for her husband, that might allow you 1 or 2 days a week to wash your hair or sleep in or buy groceries or meet a girlfriend for lunch. The other thing I might suggest is maybe augmenting that with sitters, in-home care, provided that you find an agency or an individual you trust and that you pay them by check, never cash. But then I would think, in Alabama, where assisted living is fairly tightly regulated, we might do something like what I'm doing with my mom. She could not today, I don't think, qualify for assisted living in Alabama because of her dementia. However, she lives alone, functions, drives. So I am placing her in independent living, which is unregulated, where she can live as she is. And as she gets to a certain point, which will likely be when her neighbors are telling me, I'm worried about your mother, or when I worry about my mother, then we will look at memory care. And we will move to memory care before she loses her capacity to be social and have some type of conversation. So you want to move someone to memory care when they have the best chance of assimilating, meaning they have the best chance of having conversations. Now, they may have the same conversation every day with the same person, but they're out and they're social. And, humans, we're meant to be with other people.
This is, I got to say, Shawn, this is fantastic advice. And it takes me back to another subject that I talk about all the time. That's that 4 letter word that people hate called plan. Because whether we're talking about an assisted living, whether we're talking about a memory care community, and you've talked about the pricing, there's a cost. And so we don't want to be dealing with this when we find out that mom's in this position or dad's in this position. And I've been yelling about this for a long time. We want to start understanding as our loved ones age and as we age that we need to be thinking about the cost of care. Is that going to be full time in the home that we know is very expensive? As you're saying, might that be part time, maybe in the beginning? What's it going to cost if we move them to an assisted living or a memory care community? And what you're talking about is fantastic. Great advice for people to be listening to. But I hope, and I mention this probably on every episode, they understand this word plan. It isn't just about planning a vacation or a wedding or something else. There needs to be a lot of thought as folks around us and ourselves age. One of the subject matters you sent me as well, and I really haven't talked about this, I don't think, in any of the episodes, and that's a lousy word called scammed. So, what have you experienced along those lines?
Thank you for asking, because I think it's so important for family members and spouses and anyone who has a loved one with maybe mild cognitive impairment or more advanced cognitive impairment to monitor the social media use of your loved one. We used to joke in my family that my mother thought everything was an email, whether she received a text or it was a post on whatever social media page she might be on. She thought that was addressed to her and to her only, which was humorous until it wasn't. And it became not humorous when she was on some social media site and or maybe even a text. I don't recall the specifics. This was 2018. She received word that she had won an online type auction, or not auction but award, an online a lottery type thing, and that she had won $3.2 million. And she was contacted, she thought, by someone from the company telling her that she needed to pay the taxes and the legal fees necessary to collect her award. And so she began doing so. But the thing is that the taxes kept increasing. And so over the course of many months, I found out when I was called by a local banker who said, listen, it's really not appropriate for me to call you. But because your mother listed you as a co-signer on a $70,000 loan, we felt we could reach out to you. And he let me know that she had been in many times and forwarded or money wired significant sums of money. And by significant, I mean $8,000 to $10,000 in a pop, which is the maximum that you can wire in a day. So she had been doing that for some time. I drove 2.5 hours north where she lived, spoke to the banker, spoke to her banker, spoke to her Merrill Lynch account, and in the span of about 4 hours realized that my mother, in believing that she was paying taxes to this individual and to this company, had for 8 months given away $146,000.
Wow.
And it wasn't just that that was cash. Some of it was things that were really hard to understand. For example, she sent shoes to this person's supposed daughter. She sent phones without SIM cards to this person's supposed nephew. She sent drones to this other person. Now, my mother, again, has mild cognitive dementia. She doesn't know what a SIM card is, nor a drone for that matter. So, for her to have been directed to go to the store, request these, buy these, and ship these made me very concerned, because this was something clearly that was going to be used perhaps in a not the best legal way. And so after learning these things, I found out further that the scammers were numerous. There were numerous people claiming to be this individual. And I could not convince my mother, who's not technologically, proficient, that I could do the same thing, that I could take a screenshot of someone's photo and send it to her and say that that was me, or that I could take a screenshot of a logo of a company and send that to her and she would believe it was from that company. And she cannot make this causality. She cannot understand this. And so it continues to be a problem. We've changed her phone number now 8 times. I'm changing it again tomorrow. She
Wow.
gets 25 or so texts a day because she answers them. Now, my mother lives in a non-digital world, right? She's 87. So I don't know how many folks remember the letters from the Nigerian prince in the 80s, if anyone. But there was at one time, folks would receive a letter in the mail, the U.S. mail, that a Nigerian prince had money to stash in this country and wanted to know if you would help. Well, my mother wrote the Nigerian prince back. You could do that in a non-digital age. The Nigerian prince had no idea where she lived. However, when you do that with text or on social media, when you respond, you then are sold to many, many other people who do the same thing. My mother was receiving pizzas from the pizzeria across the street from her, from the scammer, saying it was me. They were sending her photos of her home, saying they drive by. They threatened her with the FBI, with the police, with the sheriff for not paying these taxes. And then when we started piecing everything together, my mother was taught business in college and was a very copious note taker. So we found, I don't know, probably an inch and a half thick notes, which is how we found out about the SIM cards and the drones and the shoes and the pearls and all of these things. When we discovered that, we also found out that the places that she had mailed these items, we could backtrack and find out the resident. And in each case, the resident was a recently released felon. One of them was recently released for kidnapping an elderly woman. These are the people who were sending her photographs of her house. So I had to move her from that town, change her number, and it still took me 4 years to convince my mother that this was not real,
Wow.
that she had not won any money, that this was never going to come to pass, that this person was not who he said he was, even though they had not only had she been scammed in terms of the lottery scam, she was also being scammed in a catfish scam. So this man, who would have been about my age, was saying to her that they were going to run away together and spend that money together. So my mother was duped in multiple ways. And for that reason, I think she actually thought she loved this person, and she didn't have the ability to doubt. My mother was a very frugal person, so she would have never done this in her right mind. And my point of all of this is judgment is what we look for. Not knowing where your keys are is not an indication that you have some sort of cognitive impairment. But not having judgment, that's often the first thing to go. And we see this. Others may have seen it with their parents losing money here and there, being scammed, or letting their bills pile up, or making decisions to go somewhere when it wasn't appropriate. So judgment is the thing I want you to be most attentive to if you have a parent or loved one, spouse, who has mild cognitive impairment. That's where you need to be most closely monitoring them, is their personal safety, their ability to make decisions that are in their best interest and will not do them harm. My mother did herself immeasurable harm, and the only way we got out of it was one of the ploys that these scammers use is, you know what, we owe you a little money. We're going to send you some money. Look for a check from my sister. Okay, not from public or not from whomever, but from my sister. So my mother receives a check. I said, tell you what, mother, when you get that check that they promised, call me and we'll go deposit it. So we did. My mother set an appointment at the bank. She was told to deposit the check into a new account, give that account name to the scammer for whatever reason. I'm not sure why she was told to do that, but of course, the reason was he was going to immediately withdraw that money he had just given her. And it turns out, of course, it wasn't him sending the check. It was a lady that I called. And I said, ma'am, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but I'm afraid you're being taken advantage of. I don't believe that my mother was being taken advantage of too, and she received your check, and I'm going to send it back to you because I want you to please don't do this anymore. And she said, oh. I said, my mother has given away, at this point, $260,000.
Wow.
And I'd hate to see the same thing happen to you. And she said, oh, you're just like my son. Everybody's telling me this isn't real, but I don't believe it. And I've already given away $330,000. And my heart sank, because neither this woman, from the sound of her voice, nor my mother have that kind of money to give away. And now they have no money to pay for their elder care. And so, it's very, very dangerous what can happen. And generally, parents to whom this happens know something's off, but they don't want to tell us because they're embarrassed. If you are working or having a loved one with dementia, you need to now begin to involve yourself as you can, slowly but surely, into their affairs, helping them with their bills, for example, or helping them do things like block certain addresses on social media or from their phone, or changing phone numbers, or whatever it may be. Now is the time. You do not want to get a call 8 months from now, as I did, to learn that your mother has given away everything she owns to a scammer. And I want you to be alert and diligent and observant with your loved ones.
That's an amazing story, Shawn. And it's great advice. So, one thing that I want to point out that you have done, I mean, if you think an older loved one may have some cognitive issues, if that person has a laptop, if that person has a desktop computer, if that person has a phone, obviously you need to step in and address this before you potentially wind up in a situation like Shawn and his mom. That's amazing. So as we kind of wind down, Shawn, first of all, I want to thank you. Is there a number, an email, a number or website where folks can connect with you?
Well, they can connect with me and others like me in their own neighborhood through www.carepatrol.com. We have about 250 locations nationwide. We hold the hands of our clients as they journey through the healthcare continuum, and we are at no charge. So we are able to assist anyone who calls us to the extent that we can. Now, we focus on assisted living and independent living and sitter type services, but we can certainly help answer questions about skilled nursing placement or home health or hospice or Medicare or Medicaid or any number of topics. And not only can we provide information, but we can provide resources and referrals. And I hope that you'll use someone who does what we do when you embark on your own journey. I can assure you, I would have enjoyed that when I was going through it myself, and have great pleasure in helping people understand the minds and the pitfalls of that journey. So carepatrol.com will assure you that you'll find someone who knows what I know, and has the mission, personal mission, to assist others in this journey. And I hope you'll reach out. And if not, I hope you'll find some sort of guidance as you go along.
Thank you, Shawn. I very much appreciate that. And folks, I want to say to you, your listeners out there, if you have a story you'd like to share on our podcast, whether it be a personal story, whether it be about a patient, whether it be about a client, please reach out to me. I'm about to give you an email. Do you have a pen? Here comes the email. ElderEd2023 at gmail.com. ELDERED 2023 at gmail.com. So once again, thank you, Shawn. And as I say when I part ways on each episode, folks, please have yourself an awesome day until we talk again. Bye-bye.